Every conversation you have is a bridge between minds, hearts, and possibilities. Right now, as you read these words, you're not just learning English, you're unlocking doors to new friendships, career opportunities, and life experiences that seemed impossible just months ago. The truth is, communication isn't about perfect grammar or flawless pronunciation. It's about connecting with people, sharing your thoughts, and making yourself understood in ways that truly matter. Think about your last meaningful conversation in your native language. What made it special? Was it perfect sentence structure? Probably not. It was that genuine connection, the shared laughter, that moment when someone truly understood what you were trying to say. This same magic happens in English, and it's waiting for you to discover it. Your English journey is uniquely yours. Maybe you started because you wanted to travel the world, or perhaps you needed it for work. Maybe you fell in love with English movies, music, or books. Whatever brought you here, remember, every native speaker was once a beginner too. They just started earlier. The difference between you and them isn't ability, it's simply time and practice. The beautiful thing about being B1 to B2, you're at that perfect stage where communication becomes real and meaningful. You've moved beyond survival phrases. Now you can express complex thoughts, share opinions, and engage in genuine conversations. This is where the real magic happens. This is where English transforms from a subject you study into a tool you use to live, work, and connect. But here's the secret many textbooks won't tell you. Great communication isn't about memorizing thousands of words or mastering every grammar rule. It's about being genuinely interested in others, being brave enough to make mistakes, and understanding that communication is a two-way street where listening is just as important as speaking. You'll discover that communication skills are life skills, and life skills are universal. Remember, every expert was once a beginner. Every fluent speaker once struggled with the same challenges you're facing now. The difference between those who succeed and those who give up isn't talent. It's persistence, courage, and the willingness to see every conversation as a learning opportunity rather than a test. You have everything you need to succeed. You have curiosity, determination, and the courage to step outside your comfort zone. Most importantly, you have something valuable to share with the world. Your unique perspective, experiences, and voice. So take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and prepare to discover that effective communication is not about perfection. It's about connection. Let's begin this journey together. The Art of Listening, Sarah's Coffee Shop Discovery. Sarah had been living in London for 6 months, and although her English was improving every day, she still felt nervous about having conversations with native speakers. She could understand movies and read books quite well, but real conversations felt different, faster, more unpredictable, and full of expressions she'd never heard before. One rainy Tuesday morning, Sarah decided to try something new. Instead of ordering her usual coffee to go, she would sit in the cafe and observe how people communicated. She found a small table near the counter and ordered her cappuccino from Tom, the friendly barista who always smiled but never seemed to have time for conversation during the busy morning rush. As Sarah sat with her coffee, she noticed something interesting. The customers who seemed to have the best conversations with Tom weren't necessarily the ones who spoke the most or used the most complex vocabulary. Instead, they were the ones who listened carefully to what he said and responded thoughtfully. An elderly gentleman approached the counter and ordered his usual tea. "How's your morning going, Tom?" he asked simply. "Honestly, it's been a bit hectic," Tom replied, wiping his hands on his apron. "We had a problem with the espresso machine earlier, and I've been trying to catch up ever since." The gentleman nodded sympathetically. "That sounds stressful. I hope the rest of your day goes more smoothly." "Thanks, Mr. Peterson. I really appreciate that," Tom said, and Sarah could see his shoulders relax slightly. Sarah realized something important. The gentleman hadn't used complicated words or impressive phrases, but he had shown genuine interest in Tom's response and acknowledged his feelings. This was active listening in action. A few minutes later, a young woman rushed in, speaking quickly into her phone while pointing at the menu. When she finally approached the counter, she was still half focused on her conversation. "I'll have a large latte with extra shot, oat milk, and make it quick because I'm really late," she said, barely looking at Tom. Tom prepared her order efficiently, but there was no warmth in the interaction. The woman paid, grabbed her coffee, and left without any real human connection. Sarah began to understand that good communication wasn't about speaking perfectly. It was about being present in the moment and treating the other person as a real human being with thoughts and feelings. Inspired by what she'd observed, Sarah decided to practice. When she needed a second coffee an hour later, she approached the counter with a different mindset. "Hi, Tom," she said, using his name intentionally. "Could I have another cappuccino, please?" "Of course." "How are you enjoying your morning here?" Tom asked. Instead of giving a quick automatic response, Sarah paused and thought about her honest answer. "Actually, I'm having a really interesting morning. I've been watching how people communicate, and I'm learning a lot about listening." Tom's eyes lit up with genuine curiosity. "That's fascinating. What have you noticed?" Sarah felt nervous but excited. This was exactly the kind of conversation she'd been hoping to have. "Well, I noticed that the customers who really connect with you are the ones who pay attention to your responses and show they care about how you're feeling." "You know what?" Tom said, leaning slightly forward. "You're absolutely right. Some days I feel like I'm just a coffee-making machine, but when people actually listen and respond to what I say, it makes the whole day better." This simple exchange taught Sarah several important lessons about communication. First, using someone's name creates an immediate personal connection. Second, asking follow-up questions shows you're genuinely interested in the conversation. Third, sharing your own thoughts and observations can lead to deeper, more meaningful discussions. Over the following weeks, Sarah returned to the cafe regularly, not just for coffee, but to practice her listening skills. She learned that Tom was studying business at university and hoped to open his own cafe someday. She discovered that Mr. Peterson was a retired teacher who loved discussing books and current events. She met Maria, a nurse who worked night shifts, and appreciated having someone to talk to during her quiet morning breaks. Each conversation taught Sarah something new about effective communication. She learned that pausing before responding gave her time to think and showed respect for what the other person had said. She discovered that admitting when she didn't understand something led to better explanations and deeper connections. Most importantly, she realized that being curious about other people's lives and experiences was the key to meaningful conversations. One day, a new customer came in looking frustrated and confused. He was clearly not a native English speaker and was struggling to explain what he wanted. Sarah watched as he pointed at the menu and tried to describe his order using a mixture of English and gestures. Tom was patient but busy, and there was a line of customers waiting behind the struggling man. Sarah could see the situation becoming tense. Without thinking too much about it, Sarah approached and gently asked, "Excuse me, do you need some help? I speak a few languages, and I remember what it's like to feel confused in a new place." The man's face showed immediate relief. "Yes, please. I want coffee, but not strong. Something with milk, but not too much milk." Sarah smiled and turned to Tom. "He'd like a cappuccino, but could you make it with a bit less coffee and more steamed milk? Something mild and creamy." "Absolutely," Tom said, and he prepared exactly what the customer wanted. The man thanked Sarah repeatedly, and she realized something important. Communication isn't just about the words we use. It's about helping others feel understood and comfortable. Sometimes the most powerful communication tool is simply offering to help. This experience taught Sarah that being a good communicator meant being aware of others' needs and being willing to step in when you can make a difference. It also showed her that her English was better than she thought. She had successfully acted as a bridge between two people who were having trouble understanding each other. As months passed, Sarah's confidence grew. She began to understand that effective communication was less about perfect grammar and more about genuine human connection. She learned to read body language, to ask clarifying questions when she didn't understand, and to be patient with herself when she made mistakes. The coffee shop became her classroom, and every conversation became a lesson in not just English, but in empathy, kindness, and the art of truly listening to others. Building Bridges, Michael's Workplace Challenge. Michael had been working at his new job for 3 weeks, and while his technical skills were excellent, he was struggling with the informal conversations that happened throughout the day. His colleagues were friendly, but he felt like he was missing something important in their interactions. The problem became clear during a team meeting when his supervisor, Jennifer, asked for feedback on a new project proposal. Michael had several good ideas, but when he tried to share them, his colleagues seemed to lose interest quickly. He spoke clearly and his grammar was correct, but somehow his contributions didn't seem to land the way he hoped. After the meeting, Jennifer asked to speak with him privately. "Michael, I know you have valuable insights to share, but I think there might be ways to make your communication even more effective. Would you be interested in working on this together?" Michael felt embarrassed, but also grateful. "Yes, I would really appreciate that. I can see that something isn't working, but I'm not sure what it is." Jennifer smiled encouragingly. "Let's start with something simple. In our team culture, we usually begin our contributions by acknowledging what someone else has said or building on their ideas. For example, instead of jumping straight into your point, you might say something like, "That's an interesting idea, Sarah." Building on what you said about user experience, I think we could also consider, "This shows you're listening and creates a connection." Michael nodded, taking notes. So it's about showing that I'm part of the conversation, not just waiting for my turn to speak. Exactly. Communication is like building a bridge. Each person adds a piece, and together you create something stronger than what any individual could build alone. Over the next few days, Michael observed his colleagues more carefully. He noticed that the most effective communicators did several things consistently. They made eye contact when speaking and listening. They asked questions to clarify understanding. They used phrases like, "I see what you mean," or "that makes sense," to show they were following the conversation. He also noticed that they weren't afraid to say things like, "I'm not sure I understand completely. Could you explain that part again?" Or, "Let me see if I've got this right." These phrases, which Michael had avoided because he thought they made him sound incompetent, actually seemed to make conversations more productive and inclusive. During the next team meeting, Michael decided to try a different approach. When his colleague David suggested a new marketing strategy, instead of immediately presenting his own ideas, Michael said, "David, that's a creative approach to reaching younger customers. I've been thinking about the technical side of implementation, and I think there might be some ways to make your idea even more effective." The difference was immediate. David smiled and leaned forward with interest. "Really? What are you thinking?" Michael felt the energy in the room shift. People were suddenly more engaged, and his ideas were received with genuine enthusiasm. By positioning his contribution as an extension of David's idea rather than a separate proposal, he had created collaboration instead of competition. This success encouraged Michael to experiment with other communication strategies. He started arriving at work a few minutes early to have brief, informal conversations with his colleagues. He discovered that these casual interactions, talking about weekend plans, sharing a funny story, or asking about someone's family, made the formal work discussions much more comfortable and productive. One morning, he overheard his colleague Lisa talking about her struggles with a difficult client. Instead of walking past, Michael paused and said, "That sounds really frustrating, Lisa." "I haven't dealt with that particular situation, but I'd be happy to brainstorm some approaches with you if you think it would help." Lisa looked surprised and pleased. "Actually, that would be great. Sometimes it helps just to talk through the problem with someone who has a different perspective." They spent 15 minutes discussing the situation, and while Michael didn't have all the answers, he asked thoughtful questions that helped Lisa clarify her own thinking. She thanked him later, saying, "You really helped me see the situation from a new angle." Michael realized that being helpful in communication didn't always mean having the perfect solution. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer is your attention, your questions, and your willingness to think through a problem together. As weeks turned into months, Michael's confidence and effectiveness continued to grow. He learned to use small talk as a way to build relationships and make work interactions more pleasant. He discovered that phrases like, "I really appreciate you taking the time to explain that," or "Thanks for being patient while I worked through this," helped create positive feelings and stronger working relationships. He also learned the importance of timing in communication. There were moments for detailed technical discussions and moments for quick check-ins. There were times when email was appropriate and times when a face-to-face conversation was essential. Learning to read these situations became as important as the words he chose to use. One day, a new employee joined the team, and Michael found himself in Jennifer's former role, helping someone adjust to the communication culture of the workplace. He remembered how vulnerable he had felt during his first weeks and made sure to create a welcoming environment for the newcomer. "The thing I've learned," Michael told the new employee, "is that good communication here isn't about impressing people with what you know. It's about contributing to the team's success and making sure everyone feels heard and valued." Michael's journey taught him that workplace communication is fundamentally about building relationships and creating an environment where everyone can do their best work. The technical skills that got him hired were important, but the communication skills he developed were what helped him thrive and grow in his career. The power of vulnerability. Emma's friendship lesson. Emma had always been the type of person who tried to appear confident and in control, even when she felt uncertain or confused. She believed that showing any weakness would make people lose respect for her, so she rarely asked for help or admitted when she didn't understand something. This approach had worked reasonably well in her home country, but now that she was studying abroad, she was discovering that her communication style was actually creating barriers instead of building connections. The problem became apparent during a group project in her international relations class. Emma was paired with 3 other students, James from Australia, Priya from India, and Carlos from Mexico. The assignment was to analyze a complex political situation and present their findings to the class. During their first meeting, Emma listened as her teammates discussed their ideas, nodding along and pretending to understand references and concepts that were actually unfamiliar to her. When James mentioned the doctrine of humanitarian intervention, Emma nodded knowingly, even though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant. When Priya referenced the responsibility to protect principle, Emma smiled and agreed, despite feeling lost. As the meeting progressed, Emma found herself falling further behind. Her teammates were building on each other's ideas, but she couldn't contribute meaningfully because she didn't fully understand the foundation of their discussion. She felt trapped. If she admitted her confusion now, wouldn't it be obvious that she had been pretending to understand all along? The meeting ended with assignments distributed among the group members. Emma was responsible for researching the historical background of their case study, but she realized she didn't have enough context to know where to begin. That evening, Emma sat in her room feeling frustrated and isolated. She had spent so much energy trying to appear knowledgeable that she had actually learned very little and contributed almost nothing to the group's progress. The next day, Emma ran into Priya at the library. They chatted briefly about the project, and Emma found herself at a crossroads. She could continue pretending everything was fine, or she could take a risk and be honest about her struggles. "Priya," Emma said, taking a deep breath, "I have to be honest with you. Yesterday during our meeting, there were several concepts that I didn't fully understand, but I was too embarrassed to ask questions. I'm worried that I won't be able to do my part of the project well if I don't get some clarification." Emma expected Priya to be annoyed or disappointed, but instead, Priya's face showed understanding and relief. "Oh, Emma, I'm so glad you said that." I was in exactly the same situation. I didn't want to slow down the discussion by asking for explanations, but I was getting confused too. James and Carlos have studied this topic before, so they have more background knowledge than we do. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Really? You were confused too?" "Absolutely. I think we should ask them to spend some time at the beginning of our next meeting going over the key concepts. I bet they wouldn't mind. They seem really enthusiastic about the subject." This conversation taught Emma something important about vulnerability in communication. By admitting her confusion and uncertainty, she hadn't appeared weak or incompetent. Instead, she had created an opportunity for genuine connection and problem solving. At their next group meeting, Emma and Priya arrived a few minutes early to speak with James and Carlos. "We were hoping you could help us understand some of the background concepts better," Emma said. "We want to make sure we're all working from the same foundation." James and Carlos were not only willing to help, but they seemed pleased to share their knowledge. "Of course," James said. "I should have realized that not everyone would be familiar with these terms. Let me explain humanitarian intervention first, and then we can talk about how it relates to our case study." As James and Carlos explained the concepts, asking questions like, "Does that make sense?" and "Are there any parts you'd like me to clarify?" Зрение. Эмма поняла, что хорошая коммуникация часто включает в себя обучение и обучение друг другу. The most confident communicators weren't those who pretended to know everything. They were those who were comfortable with the natural process of exchanging knowledge and ideas. The group's dynamic changed completely after this conversation. Instead of a performance where everyone tried to impress the others, it became a collaborative learning experience where questions were welcomed and different perspectives were valued. Emma discovered that asking questions like, "Could you help me understand how that works?" or, "I'm not familiar with that concept. Could you explain it?" didn't make her seem incompetent. Instead, these questions often led to deeper discussions and better understanding for everyone involved. She also learned the power of phrases like, "I might be wrong about this, but," or, "This is just my initial thinking, but." These hedging phrases allowed her to contribute ideas without claiming absolute certainty, which made it easier for others to build on her thoughts or offer alternative perspectives. As the project progressed, Emma found herself becoming more comfortable with uncertainty and more skilled at navigating it through communication. When she encountered unfamiliar vocabulary during their research, she would say things like, "I came across this term in my reading, but I'm not sure I understand it completely. Have any of you encountered it before?" This approach turned potential moments of confusion into opportunities for group learning. Often, other team members had encountered the same terms and could offer explanations or share their own questions about the concepts. Emma's growing comfort with vulnerability also improved her ability to give and receive feedback. When Carlos shared a draft of his section, instead of offering vague praise, Emma felt comfortable saying, "This is really well researched, Carlos. I'm having trouble following the connection between your second and third points, though. Could you help me understand how they relate?" This specific, honest feedback was much more helpful than general comments, and it led to productive discussions about how to improve their presentation. When it came time to present their project to the class, Emma felt nervous but prepared. She had learned to see questions from the audience not as challenges to her credibility, but as opportunities to clarify and expand on their ideas. When a classmate asked a question about a point Emma had made, she responded honestly, "That's a great question, and I think it touches on something we struggled with during our research. Let me share what we found and also mention where we think more research might be needed." By the end of the semester, Emma had completely transformed her approach to communication. She learned that showing vulnerability, admitting when she didn't know something, asking for help, acknowledging uncertainty, actually made her a more effective and trustworthy communicator. Her friendships deepened because people felt comfortable being honest with her, knowing she would respond with understanding rather than judgment. Her academic work improved because she was able to ask the questions she needed to ask and seek the help she needed to succeed. Most importantly, Emma discovered that authentic communication, sharing not just what she knew, but also what she was learning, struggling with, and curious about, created much stronger connections than trying to appear perfect ever could. Navigating difficult conversations. David's conflict resolution. David had always avoided conflict. Whenever disagreements arose, he would either stay silent or simply agree with the other person, even when he strongly disagreed. He believed that maintaining harmony was more important than expressing his true opinions. This strategy worked reasonably well in casual social situations, but it began to cause serious problems when David started sharing an apartment with 3 roommates. Small issues that could have been easily resolved through direct conversation instead grew into major sources of frustration and tension. The situation reached a breaking point when David's roommate Alex began bringing friends over for loud gatherings several nights a week. The noise made it impossible for David to sleep or study, but instead of addressing the problem directly, David tried to hint at his frustration through indirect comments. "Wow, you guys certainly know how to have a good time," David would say the morning after a particularly loud evening, hoping Alex would understand that the noise was problematic. Alex would usually respond with something like, "Yeah, it was a great night," completely missing David's intended message. As weeks passed, David's resentment grew. He began to feel angry and frustrated, but he still couldn't bring himself to have a direct conversation about the problem. Instead, he started making passive-aggressive comments and avoiding common areas when Alex was around. The situation finally exploded when David had an important exam the next day, and Alex's friends stayed until 3 a.m., playing music and laughing loudly in the living room. David lay in bed feeling furious but helpless, and by morning he was exhausted and unprepared for his test. When David performed poorly on the exam, he realized that his avoidance of conflict was actually creating bigger problems than a direct conversation would have caused. He decided to seek advice from his friend Maria, who seemed to handle difficult conversations with grace and effectiveness. "The thing about conflict," Maria explained, "is that it's not about winning or losing. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone involved. But you can't find solutions if you never talk about the problems." Maria taught David a simple framework for approaching difficult conversations. First, focus on specific behaviors rather than making general criticisms of the person's character. Second, explain how the behavior affects you personally. Third, suggest specific solutions rather than just complaining about problems. So instead of saying Alex is inconsiderate and selfish, Maria explained, you could say something like, when there's loud music and conversation after midnight, I have trouble sleeping and it affects my ability to study. Could we figure out a way to balance your social time with everyone's need for quiet hours? David practiced this approach with Maria several times before finally approaching Alex. He was nervous, but he tried to remember that the goal was problem solving, not confrontation. Hey, Alex, David said. I was hoping we could talk about something. I know you enjoy having friends over, and I think it's great that our apartment is a welcoming place. I'm having some trouble with the noise level late at night, though. When there's loud music and conversation after midnight, I have trouble sleeping, and it's been affecting my ability to study and do well in my classes. Alex looked surprised. Oh, I had no idea it was bothering you. You never said anything about it. I know, and I should have brought it up sooner, David admitted. I was trying to figure out how to handle it. I'm wondering if we could work out some kind of compromise, maybe keeping the gatherings quieter after a certain time, or giving me a heads up when you're planning a late night so I can make other arrangements. Alex was immediately receptive to finding a solution. Absolutely. I don't want to interfere with your studies. What if we say that after 11 p.m. on weeknights, we'll either wrap up or move the party to that sports bar down the street, and I'll definitely give you advance notice when I'm planning something. David was amazed at how simple the conversation had been once he approached it directly and constructively. Not only had they solved the immediate problem, but Alex seemed to respect him more for being straightforward about his needs. This success encouraged David to practice direct communication in other areas of his life. When a classmate in his study group consistently arrived late and unprepared, David addressed it directly. I've noticed that our study sessions haven't been as productive as they could be because we spend a lot of time getting everyone caught up. Would it help if we sent out the agenda and required reading a day in advance? When his supervisor at his part-time job gave him conflicting instructions, David learned to ask clarifying questions. I want to make sure I understand correctly. Yesterday, you asked me to prioritize the inventory project, but today you're saying the customer database is more urgent. Should I switch my focus, or is there a way to balance both priorities? David discovered that most people actually appreciated direct, honest communication. When approached respectfully and constructively, people were usually willing to work together to find solutions. He also learned the importance of timing in difficult conversations. Trying to discuss problems when emotions were running high or when people were stressed about other things rarely led to productive outcomes. Instead, David learned to say things like, "This seems like an important conversation, and I want to make sure we both have time to focus on it. Could we set aside some time tomorrow to talk about this?" Perhaps most importantly, David learned that avoiding conflict didn't actually preserve relationships. It often damaged them. When problems were allowed to fester without discussion, small issues became major grievances, and misunderstandings grew into lasting resentments. By learning to address conflicts directly and constructively, David found that his relationships became stronger and more authentic. People knew where they stood with him, and he felt more confident expressing his needs and opinions. The skills David developed for handling conflict also improved his communication in non-conflictual situations. He became better at expressing preferences, asking for what he needed, and contributing to group discussions. He learned that assertiveness wasn't about being aggressive or demanding. It was about being clear, honest, and respectful in all his communications. Conclusion: the universal language of human connection. As we reach the end of our journey together, take a moment to reflect on what you've discovered. Through Sarah's coffee shop observations, you learned that great communication begins with genuine listening and interest in others. Through Michael's workplace challenges, you discovered that effective professional communication is about building bridges and creating collaboration rather than competition. Emma's story showed you that vulnerability and honesty create deeper connections than any attempt at perfection ever could. And David's experience taught you that addressing conflicts directly and constructively strengthens relationships rather than damaging them. These aren't just English lessons. They're life lessons that transcend language barriers. The principles of good communication are universal: respect, empathy, authenticity, and the courage to be genuinely present with other people. Remember that every conversation is an opportunity to practice these skills. Whether you're ordering coffee, participating in a meeting, making a new friend, or resolving a disagreement, you're developing abilities that will serve you throughout your life. Your English will continue to improve with time and practice. But more importantly, you're becoming a more effective, confident, and compassionate communicator. These skills will open doors, deepen relationships, and create opportunities you can't even imagine yet. The most beautiful thing about human communication is that it's never about perfection. It's about connection. Every time you choose to listen actively, speak honestly, show vulnerability, or address problems constructively, you're contributing to a more understanding and connected world. Keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep connecting. Your voice matters, your perspective is valuable, and the world needs what you have to offer. The bridge you're building through communication will carry you to places you've never dreamed of going.